Hi, it's the casual elder playing the long game. I want to start by thanking all of you for the continued support you've shown me in many ways throughout this series. It really means a lot. So, now this is the fourth and the final video in my State of the Game series, at least for now, um, for a while. So, at the end of the last video, I left you with one question. Did, did monetization make all this worse? But after researching this, I realized that the question might be too simple because I found evidence I wasn't expecting. Evidence that challenged some of my own assumptions about modern MCOC. So I want to approach this video differently. When Kabam explains something, I'm going to give you the explanation. When I'm interpreting the evidence, I will tell you. And when we simply don't have enough information, I'll tell you that too. Because at the end of this research, I found myself asking a completely different question. Did Kabam break MCOC or did they actually save it? Let's start with something we established in the first video. Old MCOC made money differently. Kabam crashed said, almost all of our revenue came from what we call baseline. Story, Alliance Quest, and Alliance War generated revenue partly because players spent units on consumables. Kabam even said every new chapter of story made an enormous amount of revenue on Quest consumables. But eventually that changed. Players got better, and Kabam deliberately moved away from making widely played widely played content in enormous roadblocks. Crashed said, players have told us in no uncertain terms they do not want to spend units on consumables. That created a problem. If Kabam wasn't going to make its money by stopping players at difficult content anymore, what was it going to sell instead? I think answering that question explains a lot about modern MCOC. Look at the modern champion acquisition, for example. In 2025, Kabam introduced Grandmaster's Grace for featured Valiant crystals. The system guarantees a 6-star or better every 3 crystals, a 7-star or better every 25 crystals, and eventually the featured 7-star at 120 crystals. That last part matters. Spend enough, and eventually RNG stops deciding whether you get the champion. But that champion doesn't necessarily remain exclusive forever, right? Champions eventually enter broader acquisition systems. Other players eventually catch up. So what did the spender buy? My interpretation is time. You get the champion before me, you rank them before me, you use them for a while when they're still scarce. You receive whatever advantage comes with having them during that period. Eventually, though, I might get the same champion. So the product wasn't necessarily permanent power. The product was getting there first. And once I started looking at MCOC through that lens, a lot of its economy started making more sense. This brings us to one of the most common complaints I've seen from long-term players. You spend heavily on progression today. Months later, those same resources become much easier to obtain. Why spend hundreds of dollars on something that eventually becomes normal? But Kabam has a real problem here. They cannot preserve scarcity forever. If today's rarest resources remain permanently rare, everybody behind the leading edge eventually gets stuck. So Kabam has to do two opposing things. They have to make progression scarce enough that getting it early has value, but then eventually make it common enough that everybody else progresses. And we know Kabam actively manages this. While discussing the 7-star life cycle, Crashed said, I have a spreadsheet that shows approximately how much 7-star stuff players are going to be able to earn and buy over time. Earn and buy. Kabam models both. They're managing how quickly the progression economy moves. So maybe the depreciation itself isn't the problem. Maybe the real argument is over speed. If Kabam moves too quickly, spenders feel like their purchase lost its value. If they move too slowly, though, and everyone behind them feels locked out. So I don't think there is an obvious perfect answer to that. And units make this even more complicated because you can buy units, but you can also earn them. I know this personally because Arena is one of my main ways I play MCOC. So when Kabam puts something behind a huge unit requirement, two players might see completely different prices. One sees dollars while the other sees hours of Arena. That means the choice sometimes isn't pay or don't participate. It's pay with money or pay with time. So that's where the concept of the thumbnail comes from. It could be argued that it's pay to win, whether because you're paying with time or you're paying with money. But I think maybe that word gets used in a very negative connotation because at the end of the day, we all gotta pay one way or another. A free-to-play player grinding thousands of units didn't get those units for nothing. They exchanged hours for them. The spender pays to skip those hours. Which brings me back to the same question. How much is getting a champion months earlier worth? How much are 50 hours of arena worth? How much is reaching the next progression point first worth? I don't think pay to win completely describes that system. I think pay to accelerate gets closer. And once I started looking for this, I realized modern MCUC sells several different forms of acceleration and value. The modern sigil sells convenience and efficiency, for example, faster energy, larger inventory, additional resources, Arena Express. The Summoner's Market offers purchase bonuses and exclusive offers. Market bonus points turn purchases themselves into progress toward additional rewards. Market loyalty gives additional currency from purchases. Then there's champion acquisition, rank up resources, guaranteed acquisition systems, and exclusive progression. So I don't think modern MCOC has one monetization model because it sells power, time, certainty, convenience, efficiency, progression, and increasingly status. And Banquet 2025 shows how far this has evolved. Last year, Kabam Crush said that they wanted the highest ranked rewards to provide a durable reason to chase these ranks. One solution was rank 6 Punisher. Only 3 players would receive one, and Kabam said those would be the only 3 rank 6 champions that will exist in the contest for close to a year. Think about that, about what gives that reward value. Yes, it's power, but a huge part of its value is scarcity. Almost nobody else has what you have. Other rewards push this further. First appearance champions, temporary exclusive access to Ascension, one-of-one profile pictures, the ability to influence a champion rework like the new rework champ we just got in Cable, and future champions delivered at high rank and signature level. Kabam is increasingly learning how to monetize exclusivity itself. And from a business perspective, there's an advantage to that. Kabam creates enormous perceived value without giving the entire player base another mountain of catalysts. Instead of selling everybody more progression, sell a small number of people something almost nobody else possesses. Now, here's something that challenged another assumption I had. Spend enough time around MCOC YouTube, the forums, Discord, or competitive players, and it's easy to picture who funds this game. Whales, massive accounts, prestige chasers, top battlegrounds players. But Kabam says that picture is incomplete. Crashed said, we make the majority of our revenue from a much more casual group of players that are often not represented in these channels. And when discussing battlegrounds, Kabam said, the vast majority of our revenue comes from players who do not, or nor have they ever played battlegrounds seriously. This surprised me because the community we see isn't necessarily the community Kabam sees. Forums aren't the whole player base. YouTube isn't the whole player base. And competitive players aren't necessarily the people funding most of the game. There's another distinction here, too. Casual doesn't mean low spending necessarily. Someone might spend thousands collecting champions and barely care about battlegrounds or anything else. Spending intensity and gameplay intensity are two different things. Sometimes it's the same person, sometimes they're not. The person doesn't have to do both. That makes the simple idea that competitive whales fund MCOC much harder to defend. It's too simplistic. It's not the full picture. Then Kabam shared an example I think every content creator should hear. They released an offer that got hammered on the forums and YouTube. Crashed expected it to perform badly. Then he checked Kabam's revenue dashboard, and his words were, it had significantly overperformed our revenue estimates. He described the offer as broadly very popular. The people talking about the offer hated it. The people buying it apparently told Kabam something different. That doesn't mean the community criticism is meaningless, though. Kabam itself says negative sentiment matters because of the potential effect on churn. But it does mean we need to separate sentiment from behavior. And I need to apply that to this series too. I've read hundreds of your comments, and they tell me something valuable about how part of this community feels. But I'm not looking at Kabam's customer database. Kabam is. That doesn't automatically make Kabam right though, but they have evidence that we do not. And that's worth keeping in mind. And then I found evidence that Kabam itself sees a problem with relying too heavily on progression monetization. In 2025, Kabam introduced first appearance champions, cosmetic versions of the champions we have. No additional combat power, and Kabam called this our first real attempt to create a cosmetic ecosystem in the contest. They said they wanted to, and I quote, create value from something that isn't directly tied to champion power, end quote. And specifically something that, and I quote, doesn't increase the power gap between free-to-play players and big spenders, end quote. Then Kabam said something even more revealing. If this works, they hope it will help them break free from this feedback loop and potentially allow them to dial back their sales. That's very significant. Kabam itself appears to recognize the limitations of constantly selling progression. They're looking for things players value enough to buy without increasing the power gap. I couldn't find public evidence showing whether first appearance champions have made enough money to accomplish that. So for now, this is just an experiment. And that leaves modern MCOC in a strange place. On one side, Kabam is experimenting with cosmetics to create revenue without selling more power. On the other side, Kabam is getting better at monetizing scarcity, such as Rank 6 Punisher, exclusive progression, early champion acquisition, Ascension access, guaranteed featured champions. Those strategies don't necessarily contradict each other. Both create things people value without simply flooding the economy with more catalysts. But there's an important distinction. A one-of-one profile picture doesn't affect the fight. A champion rank, though, does affect the fight. Early access to a champion might also affect uh, the game in a power imbalance way. Ascension might also affect the game in a increase that gap between free to play and pay to win. And that's why two players can look at the exact same system and reach completely different conclusions. One says, "I'm paying for early access and you will get it later." And the other says, "Kabam created the wait so they could sell me the shortcut." And the uncomfortable part is both descriptions might be accurate. The disagreement is whether the trade is fair. And this brings me to the part of this investigation I struggled with most. What if all of this worked? The band Crashed has described MCOC's long term survival as requiring three things: enough players, enough development resources to retain them, and things to sell to those players so we can make revenue and pay for the development resources. Without that balance, he warns about a death spiral. Fewer players, less revenue, which leads to a smaller development team, which also then leads to a loop of fewer players again, and then round and round we go. And his stated goal was, and I quote, "Our goal, or at least my goal, is for us to keep making this game for the next decade and beyond," end quote. Now look at MCOC today. The game launched in 2014. In Netmarble's Quarter 2 2026 results, the most recent one we have, the most recent report we have, is that MCOC represented 9% of of the company's total revenue. It was Netmarble's largest individual title by revenue share this quarter. 12 years after release, and Netmarble says part of its strategy is enhancing our live operations to improve earnings stability. So we have to seriously consider something. Maybe the sales worked. Maybe selling progression worked. Maybe selling time worked. Maybe selling scarcity worked. Not because every player likes those systems, but because enough players value them enough to keep an 11-year-old game commercially relevant. And if that's true, the question becomes much harder than, did monetization make MCOC worse? And this is where I have to stop, because there are things I cannot show you. I cannot show you that increased monetization caused players to quit, for example. I cannot show you that MCOC would have retained more players if Kabam sold less. I cannot show you what revenue would look like if Kabam never expanded these systems. I cannot even show you whether whales are more important today than they were 5 years ago. No one can really prove whether heavy spenders stay longer. I cannot show you whether players who stop spending are more likely to quit. Maybe they enjoy the game more after that. And I don't even think we have enough evidence as to whether cosmetic monetization will eventually let Kabam reduce progression sales. And most importantly, we do not know the alternate version of MCOC where Kabam made different choices. We don't get to observe that. So here's my interpretation. I think Kabam spent years solving one problem after another. Players didn't want to spend units simply completing content, so Kabam moved monetization away from content. Baseline collapsed, so Kabam expanded sales. Players learned to save for those sales, so sales grew. Progression needed value, so Kabam controlled scarcity. Players hated pure RNG, so Kabam introduced guaranteed acquisition. The guaranteed acquisition made spending an even clearer shortcut to early progression. And now Kabam is experimenting with cosmetics because even they seem to recognize the limitations of constantly selling more power. When I pull all of that together, I don't see one decision that broke MCOC. I see a series of solutions, and almost every solution created another problem. But here's the part I wasn't expecting when I started this series. Kabam might be right, as much as most players maybe don't see it. Maybe without these decisions, MCOC doesn't generate enough money to justify 12 years of continued development. Maybe players like me get to grind arena, save units, and play without spending much precisely because somebody else is willing to spend thousands to progress first. Maybe that person isn't ruining my game. Maybe they're helping pay for it. Or maybe Kabam solved the financial problem while slowly creating a player problem. Maybe temporary value eventually makes spending feel pointless. Maybe the endless progression chase exhausts people. Maybe monetizing scarcity creates resentment. Maybe both things are happening at the exact same time. I don't have Kabam's retention data, unfortunately. I don't have their spender cohorts. I don't have their internal forecasts. So I don't think the evidence gives me the right to decide this one for you. Now, you've seen the evidence I've presented. You've heard Kabam's side of the story. You've heard my interpretation. Now, I really want to know your interpretation. Did Kabam break MCOC trying to monetize it? Or did Kabam successfully adapt a dying business model and save the game? Did they somehow do both? Or is there another interpretation we're missing? And if you disagree with anything that I've said or presented in these four video series of the state of the game, please bring the evidence, whether it will be old Kabam posts or screenshots, whether it's financial reports from Nate Marble, whether it's some old offers that they used to give in game, or anything that I might have missed. I'd rather change my opinion because somebody found better evidence than defend something simply because I already said it. All right, that's it. That's all I had for you guys. And if you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. If you did not, I still appreciate you so much for listening this long. And hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. And remember, it's just a game.